This
Webinar, as you see
conference
right there
will
in the
now
title
be
slide.
recorded.
Innovation ideas to integrate accident injury prevention into your operation. So today's all about safety, what that means to you as an organization, to your employees, your culture, and we've got a lot of jam-packed information for you today. My name is Eric Lynn. I'm Chief Commercial Officer for TLC Companies, and we're going to run through several slides and just a little logistics for you. We've got a text box, so if you top right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a little kind of circle, a little squiggly in. That's the chat box. If you have a question or comment, please put that in there, and we will answer those either as we go, or if we miss one or two, we've got a Q&A reserved at the end, so we'll hit that. Unfortunately, we just don't have a live telephone option today, so we're going to just rest on our fingers to type it in there. So that's logistics of that. It is my pleasure today to introduce Bob Burns, who is our safety director for TLC Companies. And Kendra has on the screen there too, just in case you don't want to see a bunch of folks at the very top, you can just go in and press that down arrow and hide everyone if you don't want to see any kind of attendee name. So just a little more housekeeping items for you right there. With that, Bob, it's my pleasure to kick it over to you to take us through today's presentation.
Hey, thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. Just a little bit of background about myself. I've been working in safety in trucking for the last 20 years, but I have about 35 years of experience, and believe it or not, I graduated with a degree in safety, and I've been in safety all my life, and I'm still alive, so that's probably a good thing. So, but I do have experience in construction, manufacturing, oil and gas, and a variety of other industries. So I'm happy that Eric asked me to do this presentation for you today, and I hope I can give you some valuable information to help you in your operations and to help you, avoid accidents and injuries with your drivers and others in your facility. So on the first slide, Kendra, if you could, I wanted to give you this quote. The first and most important part of a business is to survive. It's not to maximize profit, but to avoid and minimize loss. What I've seen in working with more than over 400 trucking companies, like in the last 20 years, I have seen a number of clients close their doors. They were either expanding too fast, they were taking too many risks, or they were not adapting to the current economic structure and environment. And one key area for that was back in 2009, where there was a 28% drop in freight, and everybody was scrambling to get loads back then, and they were discounting those loads and they were going bankrupt. I mean, it was definitely something that trucking companies paid attention to. And if you're listening in, obviously you know that your company had gone through troubled times back then just because of that. So we want to make sure that you try to stay profitable. Well, not try, but you stay profitable. And one of the ways to do that is having less injuries and liability incidents that's going to cost the company a lot of money. On the next slide, you'll see predictable relationships. This is an interesting slide, and I go over it with a lot of drivers in safety meetings, because what it is that out of 330 incidents that occur, we call it the exposure. Okay, the exposure could be slipping and falling out of a truck. It could be driving too fast. It could be not wearing personal protective equipment. Out of those 330 exposures, 29 of them result in maybe just first aid cases, because 300 result in nothing. It might be some equipment damage or material damage, but only about 29 are just minor first aid cases. They're not even treatable sometimes. But one time, it's a hospital incident. So you jump out of a truck, a lot of times nothing happens. But sometimes you sprain your ankle, you dislocate your shoulder, you hit your head, or whatever. And when that one turns to 264, and I don't mean to just really get into statistics with you here, but then on a significant exposure, you'll have a fatality. So, I mean, how many times can a driver drive too fast? How many times can they tailgate? I mean, how many times could they just not maneuver correctly around the corner, or whatever they're doing? I mean, because what happens is the exposure increases. And what's really interesting is that if you take that on a personal basis, and I'll give you an example of that myself. Well, actually not me, but a friend of mine. If you're standing on the top rung of a ladder, you know, hanging Christmas lights, and you've done it for like 15 years and you never fell, what are you going to continue to do? Stand on the top rung of a ladder. If you continue to speed and you never get a ticket, you're going to continue to speed. If you continue to jump out of a truck instead of using the 3-point method of contact and you don't get hurt, you're going to continue to do that. People perform unsafely because most of the time they don't get hurt. Well, when they do get hurt, that's it. I mean, it causes a lot of pain, aggravation to that person and to the company, and a lot of lost time and indirect costs. So on the next slide, you'll see unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. 86% of all accidents occur from unsafe acts, 10% from unsafe conditions, but even in poor conditions, a lot of times drivers could still be safe because they just have to make the right choices at the right time. I mean, and then, well, like 4% of the time, they don't really have much of an effect on it, okay? Because it's a hurricane, tornado, really serious snowstorm, or like, what happens if you're going down the Donner Pass in California or whatever, you're blown off the road? I mean, you're just not going to do that? I don't know. So, but you have to remember that unsafe acts contribute to more accidents than unsafe conditions or economic event, or excuse me, not economic events, but weather conditions or anything else. So let's just pay attention to making sure drivers are monitored and educated on preventing unsafe acts which contribute to accidents.
So Bob, can we repeat those percentages again? I think you said 86% of causation was unsafe acts versus 10% unsafe conditions. Is that correct?
Correct.
So what you're really saying is it's controllable. At the end of the day, 86% of the time, these accidents are controllable by our own behaviors and discipline.
Yes. Even if there's an unsafe condition. So.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep. So on the next slide, understanding prevention and control is, let's remember that accidents are a real disruption to our operations, and not all of them end up in injuries. I mean, what's interesting is there are way too many accidents that actually happen that don't result in injuries. But that is a lot of downtime and a lot of issues and a lot of probably damage to equipment and materials, because only 3 things really happen after an accident: equipment damage, material damage, or people's injury. And so we have to really look at our operations to say, have we trained that driver, you know, how to back correctly so they don't damage the back quarter panel or their mirrors or whatever? All these things cause a lot of aggravation, a lot of downtime, and a lot of direct and indirect costs. And everybody knows that iceberg theory. I mean, why even mention it anymore? Because you know that the direct costs are just a small portion above the water, but all those indirect costs of downtime and issues that happen all the time are from the indirect costs. So an interesting philosophy I want to bring up is on the next slide. I love talking about this because I think it's really fun. There are 3 key philosophies in every business, okay? But in the economy, I mean, we have that paradigm shift. What is a paradigm shift? You know, it's a change in the work environment, the economy, trucking, the way it works now versus the way it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We are always changing. Drivers, logistics, equipment, federal motor carrier safety regulations. I mean, it's amazing how things change over time. And so what do? We have to adapt to that change. If we don't adapt to that change correctly, that increases our exposure to loss in so many areas, all because we reject it. And how do we find out how our company is absorbing these changes? How do we find that out? Well, I call it reality immersion. That's digging deep into the operation and find out what's really happening. it's like I used to call it a needs analysis for a company I worked for before, because anytime I went out to a plant or facility, you can't just talk to the owners. You just can't talk to the safety manager. You can't just talk to any, you got to talk to the drivers. You got to talk to warehouse people, find out what's really causing a disruption in the operations, is causing downtime or injuries or anything else in the operation. And once we find that out, how do we learn to adapt? And I think the most interesting thing that I've ever learned over time was this breakout thinking, is we have to learn to be innovative about how we do things. I'll give you some examples. I'll tell you, I was really ticked off in high school. Actually, later on, a few hours or a few years after high school, when I found out this guy down in Houston, Texas, invented this weed eater. I'm going like, what the heck? I should have been able to do that, because when I mowed lawns in high school, I used to get down on my knees with those damn Dyson shears and, try to mow alongside an edge. And then I was so happy when they actually put wheels on it and I was able to stand up and do that. I'm going like, why wasn't I the guy in Houston that did that? And then this other thing that really got me that I heard about is, the Swiss are #1 in making watches, but they've made watches based upon wind-up washers or self-winding watches through a mainspring. Well, they had a guy come to them that was one of their inventors or creators or whatever, and he said, hey, I got this watch. You can put this little bitty battery in, and you never have to wind up a watch again. You just replace this battery once a year. And they were so convinced that this was such a stupid idea, they took it to a trade show. The Japanese stole it, and that's how Seiko was formed. Interesting. And there was a guy in 1899. His name was Charles Duell. He was the head of the U.S. Patent Office, and he said, and I quote, "Everything that can be invented has been invented." Now that guy turned over in his grave probably 50,000 times, because in the last 30 years, more has been invented and technology and everything in the world than has, the previous 1990 years. It's just like, think about it. In 1986, if you mentioned Google, they'd be thinking you're trying to tickle them. I don't know. Jeez. It's like, and then we got self-driving trucks. Why would we ever want to not think about self-driving trucks, self-driving tractors? There's no such thing as distracted driving with self-driving vehicles, right? And look at all the technology going into trucking. The ELDs, lane departure systems, dash cams, GPS. Man, that's amazing. I just think, yeah.
So Bob, good analogies. And I think we're all just blessed to have the visual of you down on your hands and knees, with shears, trimming grass. But really good examples of innovation. What have you seen? Because it's one thing to say it, right? You got to have paradigm shift. You got to immerse yourself in the reality of the situation, have these interviews you talked about to achieve breakout thinking. But how do you start? Like you said something earlier too about, gosh, if we only had the sense of urgency pre-accident versus post, because everyone has a sense of urgency post-accident because it happened. Oh my gosh, I've got a claim. What do I do? I have to fix this. But what have you seen in successful companies that have established these three key philosophies: paradigm shift, immerse themselves, breakout thinking? Can you give some examples in transportation?
Yeah, we had a client, he was the safety director of one of our larger companies, and we used to call him Radar Man. Why? Because he would go out and he would radar all his vehicles to see if they were speeding. And then he would come back and talk to them, because they would all lie to him, say, no, I wasn't speeding. But then what they would do, just little innovative things that, some companies would do is that they would be watching their drivers out in the yard. And when they exercised a good 3-point method of contact, getting in and out of the truck, they would run out to them, shake their hand, and give them like $5 for lunch. And they go, wow, this is great. And then all of a sudden it starts spreading across the facility. Or doing pre-trip inspections, they would tape like $5 or $10 bills to the dipstick to see if they were actually checking their oil, checking their fluids. And that's what you have to do. You have to be observant of your drivers and just see some of the really cool things that you could get them to do. And then when they find out, drivers spread the word to other drivers, don't they? I mean, I think it's so cool. But did I answer your question?
You did, Bob. Thanks.
So, all right, on the next slide, which is operations control, that's another thing that I've really learned that, in every operation, whether you have an ice cream shop, a construction company, manufacturing company, or what's the most important industry in America is trucking, you got four types of things in the operation. That's production, quality, efficiency, and safety. And so I ask owners of companies all the time, CEOs, I ask them, okay, out of these four in an operation, which is the most important? And what do you think they tell me? Eric, what do they always tell me?
Production.
No, that's what they should say, because they say safety because they got a safety person asking them. Yeah, see?
Yeah, I just skipped to the answer. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. See, but that's exactly what they should say, because if you don't produce, if you don't deliver goods, if you don't do it in an efficient manner, and you don't deliver quality materials and equipment or whatever you're delivering, whether it be a reefer, a flatbed, dry van, or whatever, or bulk truck. I mean, if you don't deliver that and you don't make any money, why should you even be in business? You've got to make money, right? And so I break it down to, even though 25% of the operation should relate to each of these, I say production is 50%, quality is like 15%, efficiency is like 25%, and safety, if you're lucky, is 10%. Because if you take a 55-hour week on the part of a driver, maybe a 70-hour week, depends on when he's driving or she's driving. If they just take a small part of their operation and if they're driving and they're unloading and their customer dealings and their docks and all that stuff, if you just get a part of that in there and you get them to focus on safety, then all the other things will also fall into place. So remember, you got to keep things from going out the back door. You got to keep money coming in the front door, but you got to prevent it from coming out the back door. And I've seen way too much money coming in the front door and way too much more money going out the back door sometimes when there's really bad accidents and issues that happen in the company. So how about that next slide, Kendra? Well, safety is important. Everybody knows safety is important. And I often ask drivers, I say, who's really responsible for safety? And I get this answer all the time. Everybody's responsible for safety. And I say, well, no, that's not right at all. You are responsible for safety. If they ask the CEO, he can't say everybody. He has to say, I am responsible for safety, because if everybody takes that avenue to believe that they do it and they're responsible for it, then they'll take action. Otherwise, they think it's somebody else's problem. But safety is important because it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money. And I'll tell you what, whether it be a work comp claim, it'd be a flat tire, it would be, turning over a truck, whatever it is, slamming into somebody else. But the highest risk, no doubt about it, now we say no about a doubt it, in trucking is liability. Because we all know some of the most important professions out there are attorneys, right? If it wasn't for attorneys, we wouldn't have half the problems in trucking that we have right now. So cost, liability, and then obviously compliance. Well, everybody loves compliance, because you want to just pay attention and do everything the government wants you to do, right? And you just want to follow it to the letter of the law. Exactly. Sure. So, but
Apologies
the most
to the
important
attorneys on the call.
So, are there attorneys on the call? Yeah, well, good. That'd be the only
The
one
chat box is not lighting up yet, Bob. So
okay, yeah. Well, they're the only ones we should charge to be on the call, because they'll use this information against us. So,
oh boy.
Anyway,
moving on.
Yeah, moving on. So, and one thing, sometimes I'll be at a restaurant or someplace, and I'll ask somebody what they do for a living, and they say, yeah, I'm just a truck driver. And I'm going like, that is BS. I say, anytime anybody ever asks you that question, you got to tell them, you got to say, I am a professional driver. I'm a professional truck driver, because I'm a driver, because I drive my pickup truck or whatever, but you're a professional driver, and you make sure everybody knows that because you have the most important job in America. And, talking about accidents for just a minute here about safety is that there are 30 to 35,000 fatalities a year in motor vehicle accidents. And that's so much less than there used to be. Things are so much safer nowadays. Approximately 10% of those are actually involving commercial trucks. These are fatalities. I'm not talking about injuries or damage or anything like that. But about 80% of the time, it's not the professional truck driver's fault. Even though it might be a preventable accident, it wouldn't be their fault. So really only about 800 to 1,200 fatalities a year are actually the fault of professional drivers. And think about the millions and millions of miles a year. I mean, just at TLC with all our drivers, I mean, our drivers are driving close to about 900 million miles a year. And we see about maybe 4 to 5 fatalities a year. And that's the humane reason. That's the number one. We want safety to be the most important. Okay, on the next slide. Now, this doesn't change very much. Just doesn't change very much. 3 ways that drivers get hurt the most: slip, trips, and falls, handling and moving materials and securing equipment, and motor vehicle accidents. Through extensive analysis, and Tim Hacked on our staff, I mean, he's done some really extensive analysis, and it doesn't change much from year to year, but 91% of all the injuries that occur are from these events. And even just this morning when we were talking about the injuries that happened from last week, I mean, they were 9 out of 22 were on ice and snow. So that's the unsafe condition. How we effectively walk on ice or snow or climb down and up or around or whatever has an effect on whether or not we're going to slip and fall, even though we know it's an unfavorable condition. And another thing is that we have to look at the cause and not the result. Because if you fall out of a truck or off a flatbed or even in a parking lot, I mean, the slip, trip, fall, or how that person slipped, tripped, and fell is more important than how he or she got hurt, because you don't know. How they got hurt is fortuitous in nature. We don't know. When you fall, what are you going to do? Injure your shoulder, hit your head, bust your finger? Could you be laid up for years, or could you be laid up for, an afternoon? We just don't know. So we want to make sure that, we really look at the causes of these injuries that have occurred and then go after that as far as the prevention. And the next slide. We'll wrap it up here in about 5 minutes or so. Well, that was the cause versus the results. I already talked about that, Kendra, so we can put the action plan on. Yeah. So if we have a safety concern, I mean, it could be as simple as drivers not wearing seatbelts, lifting incorrectly, jumping from a truck, whatever it is. We have a safety concern. We have to figure out how we're going to implement that as far as prevention measures in the company. So when we do that, we have to target the actions we can take. And just like I mentioned about how a company used an incentive of like $5 to make sure that they use the 3-point method of contact, because they think they're going to get paid that all the time when they do it correctly by getting in and out of the truck. And then, speeding, or, you can see where these things are happening, and then you could put incentives in or disciplinary action. I can tell you nowadays, disciplinary action is a lot more difficult because we're all short on drivers. And when you discipline them, then they say, I'm going someplace else. You're not treating me right or whatever. So I would say incentivize them, because that's probably a better way to get them to understand how to be safe. And that would be the method, how we develop and implement. And then who would be responsible? Is it the safety director? Is it everybody in the company that focuses on a specific aspect to get this implemented? And let's put some dates of completion in there. And this is kind of a little bit generic, but I think that it's really important that you understand that you can get a lot of good ideas from drivers based upon their feedback. Sometimes you ask, and they give you like really bad feedback, but then you at least absorb it and say, hey, we need to consider this. It's like, well, I want you to take the governor off my truck so I could be driving 75 miles an hour. Well, you know what? Safety is a little bit about controlling your speed too. So, all right. And then, yes.
Bob, I was listening to a president of a trucking company in Arizona last week, about 150 trucks. And was interesting, his mindset. He said, when we decided to take safety serious and really embed in our culture, it's when they said, we're going to change our compensation plans. And that 1/3 of a driver's compensation would be based on safety metrics. And what's interesting about that is his retention, driver retention, which is tough, right? There's driver attraction, but also how do we retain the drivers? Went up 25% when they instituted that. I thought that was just really interesting. So you've got the carrot, so to speak, because you were mentioning carrot and stick a second ago, with punitive versus reward. But he wanted to say this is that important. It's 1/3 of your compensation. But what he didn't understand or didn't foresee was how it was received. And it was received by the drivers to say, oh my gosh, they must really care about me. And so where he was really trying to address safety in his culture, he didn't really look that far ahead to say, will this positively impact my retention? But it did. So just another way of looking at this, of safety impacting so much more than just productivity or not getting the crosshairs of a government agency, but it actually can impact your retention in a positive manner.
Yeah, that's great comments. I mean, and it's great feedback from clients. Clients give us some great information. When something works, there's never a reason not to share that unless it's proprietary. And a lot of things are really not proprietary. They're just good ideas from companies that come up with great ideas to help make things better, improve the operation, and definitely reduce the losses through good safety within the company. So yeah, thanks, Eric. That was good feedback from that client. So, okay, and on the next slide, if we could put that up. Yeah, well, everybody probably knows about this now, but beginning February 7th of this year, which was last week, to be eligible to, in order for the entry-level driver training to take place, have to have these eligible required skills or knowledge tests for a commercial driver's license applicants that must be completed through this entry-level driver training program, and it has to be done through a registered training provider. Now, we don't talk as much about compliance because there's a lot of companies that do that, like J.J. Keller and a number of organizations. But, TLC has kind of taken this seriously, and we do have some information we could pass along to you for driver training and evaluation. However, that part of it doesn't really comply with this. You're talking about an entry-level driver coming in and getting trained, that you have to follow specific guidelines. And we have summaries of all that we could provide to you if you want that, but I'm sure you probably have them already. But if you need them, get in touch with us. So, and that's the only thing I'm really going to talk about as far as the regulations go, because I mean, last year the big deal was the commercial. It was the clearinghouse. Excuse me, the clearinghouse. There's always something that seems to come into play that causes us some disruption in our operations, but hopefully that disruption is a good thing, because it's making it safer.
So Bob, how do you feel about the current back and forth on the Hill with allowing 18 to 20-year-olds to do over-the-road driving? Thoughts there?
Yeah, I think most of our clients and myself don't really believe in having somebody 18. I mean, it really gives them only 2 years of driving experience just driving a normal four-wheeler, I just think it takes more than that. Unfortunately, everybody is so stressed on getting drivers that they're opening that up to 18-year-olds. And I think liability with the liability insurance through commercial carriers and all that are not going to allow that. But if they do, they have a hard time even taking anybody with, 6 months or a year, the commercial carriers. But anyway, it's something that might come into play because we're so stressed on getting drivers, but I really don't agree with that, and I really think that people listening in here probably don't agree with it either. But it's another way to open up. Uh, it's another way to open up the availability to get more drivers. So,
Yeah, it makes you wonder who's putting the bug in Chris Spears' ear, because he's with ATA. He's the one that's really advocating hard for this, and he's supposed to be representative of the industry. So it is kind of interesting, the disconnect, because I hear the same thing, Bob, when I'm talking to our clients. It's like, yeah, I'm desperate, but not that desperate, and yet, one of our largest lobbying organizations on behalf of the industry is really trying to argue for it.
yeah. That's unfortunate because I think that'll increase the number of motor vehicle accidents out there. And they might be minor accidents, but we're going to see a lot of damage on trucks, that's for sure, if they come in. So, anyway. All right, and our last slide is Kendra's bringing up. These are just some of the benefits that TLC provides to you as far as safety activities. I mean, the Top Dog and driver newsletters, they come out every month. And one thing that Tim Hack reminded me of, before this webinar, is that at the end of April, that's our fourth quarter, we'll be picking a grand prize top dog winner that has to fill out 12 quizzes, be injury and accident free for the whole year, and then they're eligible to win that $10,000. So, they get $20, once a quarter, just for filling it out, sending it in, and get at least 7 out of 10 correct. And then, if they fill out 3 and a quarter, then they're eligible to win one of 10 $250 awards, which is funded in their paycheck. Then we have client newsletters that come out periodically. All our clients are eligible for Infinity online training. If you want to do online training, we don't do the DVDs and stuff like that anymore, even though we do have an injury prevention DVD and a flatbed DVD, but they're also on the Infinity online training site, so you could actually just watch them through there. Tammy Howarth, our organization, does excellent FMCSA mock audits. She's really good. She has a lot of experience in her background as a driver, and she really is an expert on the regulations. Then we all do client visits and on-site training. All it has to do is be requested. We try to get in contact with you and at least visit once a year, and then we'll do online training per request. And then, we also send out twice a month driver safety tips. And something that's not on there that you also have, but it does cost a little money, is a CDL legal. If you want to fight violations, your drivers could sign up for that. There is a fee involved of like $35 a month, but it's pretty good as far as fighting violations. So, but that's about all I have. I want to try to keep it to about 35 minutes here. So I'm not sure if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, Bob. Well, Kendra just put that question in the queue. Let's just pause for a second and see if we can build up any. I do have a question for you, just as we wait for that. So if you're a leader in a trucking company today, and you recognize the opportunity in safety, but you feel like you don't have a lot of folks that are aligned with you. They're just not ready to take the hill with your passion on the subject. What's one or two just easy first steps you could do to try to start galvanizing the troops, so to speak, get the interest level up, get folks excited about really embracing a culture of safety? Any thoughts there?
Well, a lot of it does have to do with incentives, but first you have to make sure that there's a bottom line training approach, a foundation training approach to them, so they really understand about accident prevention, really understand how losses occur and what past losses have happened. Because, you have to ask them the question is, what if it was your spouse? What if it was your kids? What if something happened? And trucking is a dangerous industry. I mean, it's well controlled, but it's dangerous. And if you don't set the impact through foundation in your company by having them understand that and having them pay attention to that, then you're going to increase the exposure. And you don't want to have any of your dispatchers, any of your operations people, anybody calling, being called saying, hey, my driver just flipped the truck, and he might be on life support. I mean, I think you have to get to it by the humane reason and by saying that, hey, we don't want any police showing up at our door saying that this person got hurt. And then also, you incentivize them by safety by, when you talk to them in dispatch, and you're talking about something, a load to be delivered or whatever, you also have to say, hey, do you have your seatbelt on? Are you maintaining a good following distance of 4 to 6 seconds? Are you really watching out on those wide right turns? I mean, you want to get everybody impacted throughout the organization so they do at least a small part of it to help implement it in the operations, because we know we want to get the production up, but if you get the production up and the safety goes down, then all of a sudden the company's in trouble.
Good advice, Bob. Thank you. I don't see any questions queued up. So, Kendra, if you want to put that final contact slide up there, that'd be great. Here's Bob, Tim, and Tammy's contact information. All three are experts in safety and specifically in transportation. So right there, and we'll send this deck out to all the attendees as well, so you have a copy. But please take advantage of a lot of years of competency. These folks know the industry. They know how to really dig into your safety practices and process and really give you some sound advice on turning it around. So please take advantage of that. Reach out whenever you can. I want to thank you for spending the time today. It says a lot about how much you care about safety, how much you care about embedding in your culture, how much you care about your people. And that's some of that intrinsic, I just talked about in the Arizona story, that can really, really lift your retention when we know it's a struggle today all the way around. Bob, great work. Your passion, second to none. I hope you guys felt it like I did, because whenever I go on a call with Bob, I always come out there excited to talk about safety. So thanks, Bob. Great job. And thanks all for attending today. Be safe and take care.
One last quick comment. Under Tamara Howell's email address, go Thowell, Thowell, because I'm sure Tammy will probably tell me about that after we get off. But anyway, I just wanted to correct that, let you know. And,
good catch.
Good.
Good catch.
Okay. All right.
Thanks all. Take care.
All right.